Chapter 9. Last Stand at Callaway Ranch. 11 days into what the news had started calling, with the particular tastelessness of a headline written for clicks rather than accuracy, Brazil's Blood Moon Terror, the military sweep operations had accounted for 19 confirmed kills of wounded or stranded creatures across a 60-kilometer radius of the cave. Command believed the number remaining, if any, to be in the single digits. Command was wrong. A pack of 4 had holed up in a limestone sinkhole 8 kilometers from Wade Callaway's ranch, 2 wounded from the fighting at the cave mouth to make the return journey before dawn on the third night, and they had spent the days since in a kind of feral, starving torpor, venturing out only after dark, only when hunger overrode whatever remained of the caution that had once made them formidable hunters rather than desperate ones. Wade didn't know any of that. He knew only that Tiago's youngest brother had gone missing from a neighboring property 2 nights back, that a search party had found nothing but blood and drag marks in a dry creek bed, and that the soldiers who'd come out to investigate had left again after half a day, satisfied there was nothing more organized than a lone straggler and 2 stretched thin elsewhere to spare more than a cursory look. "They're wrong," Wade told Tiago, cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table by lamplight. "Ain't no lone straggler drags a grown man near on quarter-mile through underbrush. That's more than one." The soldiers said. "Soldiers got a whole province to worry about," Wade said. "I got about 400 acres and everybody on it." Different math. He finished with the rifle and set it aside, reaching for the shotgun next. "You get your mother and your sisters into the cellar tonight. Every night, till I say different. You think they're coming here?" Wade looked out the kitchen window at the darkening tree lean, at the first faint red tint beginning to bleed into the rising moon. Not a waking moon, nothing like the blood-swollen horror of those first 3 nights. Just an ordinary moon with an ordinary, dying orange glow to it, the kind that had nothing supernatural in it at all except for what the last 11 days had taught every soul in that province to fear reflexively, forever, whether or not the danger was real. "I think something hungry enough has already worked out there's cattle and people out this way, and it's going to keep coming till there's nothing left to come for, or till somebody puts a stop to it," Wade said. "And since the somebody with the guns and the helicopters is stretched too thin to bother with a rancher and his hands way out here, I reckon that somebody's going to have to be me. They came just after midnight, and this time it wasn't one." The soldiers said. "Soldiers got a whole province to worry about," Wade said. "I got about 400 acres and everybody on it." Different math. He finished with the rifle and set it aside, reaching for the shotgun next. "You get your mother and your sisters into the cellar tonight. Every night, till I say different. You think they're coming here?" Wade looked out the kitchen window at the darkening tree lean, at the first faint red tint beginning to bleed into the rising moon. Not a waking moon, nothing like the blood-swollen horror of those first 3 nights. Just an ordinary moon with an ordinary, dying orange glow to it, the kind that had nothing supernatural in it at all except for what the last 11 days had taught every soul in that province to fear reflexively, forever, whether or not the danger was real. "I think something hungry enough has already worked out there's cattle and people out this way, and it's going to keep coming till there's nothing left to come for, or till somebody puts a stop to it," Wade said. "And since the somebody with the guns and the helicopters is stretched too thin to bother with a rancher and his hands way out here, I reckon that somebody's going to have to be me. They came just after midnight, and this time it wasn't one." Wade heard the cattle first. Not the panic stampede of that first terrible night, but something worse, a low, terrified lowing that meant the herd had already scented death nearby and had nowhere left to run. He was out of the house and moving before Tiago had finished loading the second rifle, shotgun in hand, a spotlight rig from a truck battery slung over one shoulder, because he'd learned in 11 days that light bought seconds, and seconds are the only currency that mattered out here. The first one came at him from the barn roof, and Wade's shot caught it mid-leap, dropping it in a tangle of wing and claw 10 feet from where he stood. He didn't have time to feel anything about it. The second and third broke from the tree lean together, flanking wide, and Wade had one thought, clear and simple as anything he'd ever known, before the fighting swallowed every other consideration. Get them away from the house. He ran for the open pasture, shouting, firing into the air, anything to draw their attention off the barn, off the cellar where Tiago's family huddled in the dark, off Tiago himself, who was screaming his name from the porch and being physically hauled back inside by his mother shaking hands. It worked. That was the terrible, fitting shape of it. It worked exactly as Wade Calloway had intended, and cost him exactly what he must have known, somewhere in that last sprint across open ground, that it would. The second creature caught him from behind at the edge of the pasture, and the third joined it a heartbeat later, and Wade went down fighting in the tall grass beneath a moon gone the color of rust, firing until the shotgun was empty and then using it as a club, and even then, wounded and bleeding out into the dirt of a country that hadn't been his own 11 years ago and had become, somewhere in that time, the only home he had left. He did not stop fighting until there was nothing left in him to fight with. Tiago found him an hour later, after the last shrieking had faded and the surviving creature had limped off wounded into the dark, dragged there by the shot Wade had somehow put into it even as the other two brought him down. He was still breathing, barely, when Tiago reached him, and for a moment, one terrible, hopeful moment, Tiago thought there might be time to save him. "Senor Wade," Tiago said, kneeling in the bloodied grass, pressing both hands hard against a wound that no pressure in the world was going to close. "Senor Wade, stay with me. The radio, I call for help, they are coming." Wade's eyes found his, and something in them, even now, held on to a rough, exhausted kind of calm. "Cattle," he managed. "They still in the barn?" Yes, they are safe. You kept them safe." "Good." Wade's hand found Tiago's arm, gripping it with what strength he had left. "Your mama, your sisters. You keep them safe too, you hear me? Don't you let none of this." He coughed, and something in his breathing changed, and Tiago felt the grip on his arm begin, slowly, to loosen. "Don't let it be for nothing." He didn't say anything else. Tiago held on to him anyway, in the ruined pasture, under a sky finally beginning to fade from red toward the ordinary gray of approaching dawn, until the sound of an approaching military transport reached them, far too late to matter, and far too late to do anything now but carry away the dead. By the time the story reached Curtis Lane's desk 2 days later, a rancher, American-born, credited by surviving witnesses with single-handedly killing at least 6 of the creatures over the course of the crisis before dying to save the family in his care, it had already taken on the shape of legend among the villages he'd spent 11 years living beside. They buried him on a low rise overlooking the ranch, cattle grazing in the pasture below exactly as they had before any of this began, and Tiago, who had never once in 11 years called him anything but Senor Wade, stood at the grave afterward and, in a rough, unpracticed voice, said the only eulogy that felt true. "He wasn't from here," Tiago said, "but he died like he was." 40 kilometers north at the base, word of the rancher's death reached Alan secondhand, relayed by a soldier who'd heard it over the radio net, and something in the telling of it. The man alone, outnumbered, drawing the danger away from people who weren't even his blood, settled into Alan's chest alongside the grief he was already carrying for Frank, for Derek, for all of them, and stayed there. He didn't know Wade Calloway. He never would. But he understood, in a way he couldn't yet have put into words, that the ledger of what this had cost was far from finished being written, and that somewhere out past the wire, in a countryside still holding its breath against the next red moon, ordinary people were still paying it.